What's up, everybody? Man in the Cage, MMA and Combat Sports Podcast. Jeff Brantley here. Glad to be doing a YouTube Live today. We went live last week, of course, right at the top of the hour here, and I know some of you still joining, but we went live at I believe it was at 4 o'clock last week on a Friday as well, 4 o'clock Central Time, that is, and I had a blast with it, breaking down some of the weigh-in stuff before UFC 262, went over some other things. So going to make this a routine weekly that we do a live on a Friday. Sometimes it'll be on Instagram Live or maybe Facebook, and of course, times like this, maybe it'll be on YouTube Live. So excited to be back to do another live video here, another YouTube Live. Excited for it, and going to break a lot of things down today. Of course, we had the UFC Vegas 27 weigh-ins today. We also have Bellator 259 coming up in about a half hour, by the way. The prelims getting started in a half hour here. Have some extra thoughts on those, also some extra betting tips on that card tonight that I'm going to give out in this live video here in just 1 second. And then again, as I said, I'm going to start out with some UFC Vegas 27 reaction with those weigh-ins coming today. Cody Garbrandt, Rob Font, both making weight. And one big piece of news today, and we'll go over that as well. But otherwise, somewhat quiet weigh-in day once again. But we're going to go over all of that in 1 second right here on the Man in the Cage MMA and Combat Sports Podcast. Again, I'm Jeff Brantley. Many of you know that already. Follow me on Twitter at Jeff_Brantley. Same thing on Instagram, guys, at Jeff_Brantley. Go check out episode 88 of the podcast right now. That's out previewing Bellator 259. It's also previewing UFC Vegas 27 with my guy Luke Lampy, going over some of the betting tips for that card. Also briefly went into LFA 108. That's also tonight, and Invicta 44. So some other fight cards going on tonight. And I talked a little bit more extensively as well about the big boxing card coming up tomorrow as Jose Ramirez takes on Josh Taylor in a junior welterweight bout there. Going to be a very good one to unify those belts. Very excited for that boxing clash between those two and some of the other fights on that card. So go check it out right now. Episode 88 of the Man in the Cage MMA and Combat Sports Podcast. Also go check out the website, maninthecagemmma.show. You can get everything there. Links to the YouTube channel, links to latest episodes, links to merchandise. I'm wearing a Man in the Cage t-shirt right here. You can go grab those over on maninthecagemmma.show. Go check out the YouTube channel. You're already here anyway, but if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe to it now, the Man in the Cage MMA and Combat Sports Podcast YouTube channel. And then if you want any of the audio versions of any of these episodes, again, episode 88 now out now everywhere. Go check it out on Anchor, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, guys. And again, I'm going to start in the UFC Vegas 27 here, and thanks for everyone for joining me. As again, more people continue to join me here. UFC Vegas 27, the weigh-ins today, and stare downs, by the way. We had the face-offs as well, almost right after. I mean, that's what you get with a lot of these fight night cards, especially right now that we're in the Apex Center. You know, before when the UFC was hitting the road every single week, they're back to hitting the road every single pay-per-view now. But for these fight nights, at least in the short term, we'll see if Vegas opening back up and some of these other cities opening back up changes that. Although Dana White did say, I believe it was last week or the week before, that they intend to keep doing fight nights all year at the Apex Center. So we'll see if that changes at all. But for right now, you know, the UFC is not hitting the road for these fight night cards. They're staying at the Apex Center. So you get these weigh-ins and then you immediately get the face-offs almost right away. You don't normally get that when they're on the road. I mean, even last week with UFC 262, you got the weigh-ins in the morning, and then later in the afternoon, then you got the face-offs as, you know, they bring the crowd in, all that stuff. So we get the face-offs pretty close to the weigh-ins right now. That went down earlier this morning. As I was mentioning at the top of this YouTube Live here, there wasn't a ton of big breaking news. Only one big piece of news, really. Raulian Paiva, he had to pull out of his fight against David Dvorak. He was actually hospitalized. I don't know any latest details on Paiva. Of course, you know, other fighters have been hospitalized as well when trying to cut weight when they have bad weight cuts, and that's what put Paiva there. Hopefully he's okay. Obviously, again, a lot of it's dehydration from those bad weight cuts. So, you know, thoughts are with him. Hopefully he's okay. But he had to pull out of his fight with Dvorak because of that bad weight cut. So this morning, it looked like, and this was even before the weigh-in period even started, by the way. I mean, I tweeted it out on Twitter again at Jeff_Brantley this morning that right away it looked like, even before the weigh-in period was going to start, that maybe this is going to be a crazy morning because we already might have one fight off. It turns out, though, that fight is actually not off. Paiva is out of that fight, but the UFC had a last-minute replacement for that bout as they tab now Juan Camilo Rondoros. Rondoros did weigh in today over the limit, but he is going to still fight Dvorak coming up tomorrow night at UFC Vegas 27. So Rondoros, the UFC came out right away. made that statement that, well, there was first some media reports, then the UFC confirmed it, then he weighed in. He did weigh in again over the limit, so he does get fined. He doesn't get his full purse for that fight with Dvorak, but still, for Rondoros to take that, it's good because we don't lose a fight, obviously, and Dvorak still gets an opponent. And for Rondoros, short notice, this is his chance. He's 4-0 in his MMA career, a pretty good MMA career from what I've seen so far. Just emergency taping him real quick, Rondoros, but this is his shot, obviously, to maybe at least looked competent in there against Dvorak. And last little point on Rondoros and Dvorak, because again, there's not too many angles to that fight right now. Both these guys, not anything against Dvorak, not anything against Rondoros, but both these guys still elevating their careers, still climbing the ladder. So there's not huge implications with a fight. There's always implications of some sort, but there's not huge implications necessarily with this fight. But still, last part on Rondoros here. A lot of people today were talking about the fine, that he is getting fined 20% of his purse for missing weight. And a lot of people had an issue with that because, of course, he is taking this fight short notice within 24 hours here. Almost last second, it seems that the UFC dialed him up. It would seem on, to everybody's naked eye that, they called him up, or he was standing by, or he was already at the apex, said, I'd fight if you need me. And he's doing them a favor a little bit. So why take the money from him? But I think we all need to slow down with that a little bit with him, because number one, when you sign a contract, you're still signing that contract to make weight. And he probably told them he could make weight, or at least get close to it. Again, I'm just assuming. Assumptions will kill you sometimes, but I'm assuming that. But, he signed the contract that said, I'll make this weight. So you do have to fine him still. Also, it would be unfair to the other fighters a little bit if you get, and again, maybe you could make a stipulation or a clause, but it still would be somewhat unfair to these fighters, the other fighters, if you start not fining certain people, if you start stop fining certain fighters and say, hey, you're not going to get fined because you took the fight on 24 hours notice. The UFC wants you to stay ready. They want you to come in at the limit they ask you to. So, that's point number 2 there. And then point number 3 here that I brought up on Twitter today that I don't think anybody's really thinking of, but I wonder a little bit too if Rondoros was actually already there because the UFC knew Paiva might not make weight. I wonder if Paiva's team had said a week ago or a couple days ago, this fight week even, hey, you know what? We're feeling a little iffy about the weight cut, just letting you know. And the UFC might have said, called him up and said, hey, we've had you on our radar. We might need somebody on Saturday. Can you come? Can you hang out? And if we need you, we'll give you a call up. And maybe they expected me, up until today, hey, Paiva, maybe he's still going to try to weigh in, but then he gets hospitalized with the weight cut, can't make the weight. UFC has to call up Rondoros here. He steps in. So he might have known for a week or so, Rondoros, that he might fight this week. You got to stay ready. We saw that with, Michael Chandler lost this last Saturday against Charles Oliveira at UFC 262, but we saw that the fight, well, not the fight before that, but a couple fights before that, right? And back in January, the first pay-per-view of this year, Chandler was actually standing by, was going to fight it was actually back in October, excuse me. When he first got to the UFC, he was standing by as a replacement for the Khabib-Justin Gaethje fight. He was there as a replacement that if Khabib gets COVID or something happens, same thing with Gaethje, because this has been such a crazy year for all athletes, everybody in general, I'm going to fight. And Chandler made weight. He was ready. He was ready to go. That's what you have to do in your replacement. So again, Rondoros, last little point there again. Let's not assume things here. Let's wait until more news comes out. I don't feel too sorry for him that he did get fined a little bit of his purse, even though he is doing the UFC a favor. And hopefully this is a chance for him to make his name, or at least make a little bit of a name here against David Dvorak coming up tomorrow on UFC Vegas 27. All right, the rest of this card, though, again, not really any big other massive news that happened. No really any other massive weigh-in errors or anybody that came in overweight. Everybody pretty much hitting their mark. Everybody showing up, and we have an official card the rest of the way down, including the main event, Cody Garbrandt taking on Rob Font. It's going to be a very good fight. To be honest with you, I thought that these guys in the face-off today would be a little bit more intense, just knowing who Cody Garbrandt is, knowing what kind of fighter Rob Font is. I thought maybe there'd be a little bit more of what we even saw from Oliveira and Chandler last week, which wasn't, hey, I'm going to shove you at the weigh-in. Hey, I don't hate you necessarily, but, just a tension there between the two of them. You didn't really see that today between Garbrandt and Rob Font. Both guys just, coming in like it's a business trip as usual, like they're visiting on a business trip here. Hey, we're coming in, we're going to handle business, and then we're going to leave. I was a little surprised at that. But, again, both these guys, they look concentrated. They know this is a big fight. There's no bad blood there. See, I can see why a little bit, but I still expected a little bit more tension between these two. But the main event's official. Both guys make weight today. Cody Garbrandt did take a little bit of time actually to weigh in, and you started to get maybe a little nervous. And I say a little bit just because there was still a good hour and 13 minutes, maybe just slightly under an hour left earlier today when Cody Garbrandt did weigh in. But whenever, the main event fighter, whenever there's some minutes and there's a half hour ticking by and then another half hour ticks by and you're just like, okay. And we've seen a bunch of other fighters, including Rob Font, already weigh in. Where's Cody Garbrandt at? You start to worry a little bit. But he came in, he weighed 135 and a half pounds. Right on the mark, and that main event is official and should be a very good one. And I'm really looking forward to that one because what kind of Cody Garbrandt are we going to see coming up tomorrow at UFC Vegas 27? And I talked about that with my guy, Luke Lampy. And again, for those just joining us, you can check out episode 88 of the Man in the Cage podcast, fully previewing UFC Vegas 27 with my guy, Luke Lampy, as well as a full Bellator 259 preview tonight, which I will get to in just a second here before that card kicks off, some extra thoughts on that. But we talked about that fight and how Cody Garbrandt and Rob Font is going to come down to a few things. Number one, the length of Rob Font. Rob Font has about a 5 or 6 inch reach advantage in this one. Both guys are the same height. Both guys bantamweights, obviously, around the height they are. But Rob Font has got a really good reach advantage in this fight. And that could really play into it because this is going to be, you expect, a striking battle. Not saying Cody Garbrandt has never, went to the wrestling well ever. He's got a lot of time with Team Alpha Male in his career with Uriah Faber and those guys. So, he does have somewhat of a wrestling background, if you will, but he's a boxer, right? He's a striker. This is going to be a striking affair. So if this fight's on its feet for a majority of it, which it's going to be, maybe that length of Rob Font starts to bother Cody Garbrandt just a little bit. So that's something to watch in this fight coming up tomorrow. And then also the Cody Garbrandt angle of things we'll get into maybe whether he's going to go, wild Cody Garbrandt or not in a second here, but also Cody Garbrandt coming into the fight, just some extra factors. He had a bicep injury that he was recovering from that he had to get surgery on. So he had the bicep injury. Then he had a bad bout of COVID, in which, you're hearing stories about him, maybe having blood clots in his lungs, some of those things. Real nasty stuff was Cody Garbrandt coming back from. So I'm curious to see if any of that has any lasting effects on him going in here. We've seen other athletes, including fighters, really have a tough time coming back from COVID-related things, especially the guys that have been really struck hard by it. So certainly, Cody Garbrandt coming into this fight here, it could be one of those things again where does that affect him, especially later on in the fight? If it is his lungs, if it is his breathing, if this fight does make it past the second or third round or fourth round, how's Cody's gas tank going? Does he look a little tired? The weight cut was a little harder for him today. Does that affect him even more so because of coming off of COVID? It'll be interesting to see that. But then on top of everything, of course, then you have the questions you're always going to ask with Cody Garbrandt, which is, what Cody's going to show up. Is it going to be the wild, crazy, gunslinging Cody Garbrandt, or is it going to be the tempered Cody Garbrandt that uses his head movement, uses that hand speed, uses that power that he has? Garbrandt, I told Luke this yesterday, and Luke obviously agreed with me that Garbrandt has some of the best power in the bantamweight division, maybe in all of the UFC and all of mixed martial arts, especially for that division again, where Garbrandt just hits differently. He's also got some very fast hands when he's on. When he sets up his shots, he's very good. When he uses head movement and he's calculated, Cody Garbrandt could be one of the toughest outs in the UFC in mixed martial arts. If that Cody Garbrandt shows up, it could be an interesting night, even with the length of Rob Font. But as we've seen many times, maybe not the last time out against Rafael at Sunsao, in which he looked a little more calculated, but the times out before that against TJ Dillashaw and others, he had moments where he ditched, he ditched playing it conservative. He ditched taking it easy. He ditched that tempered mentality and he just went after it, right? You saw the head movement disappear. You saw him just opening up with shots, putting his chin high up in the air, and he got caught in all those fights, got knocked out. Some of them he was actually doing well even early on, and then he opened up and lost everything. If that Cody Garbrandt shows up, it could be a short night because Rob Font is a nasty striker. Either way you see it, either way you slice it, I do think someone's probably going to get knocked out in this fight. I am going to pick Rob Font to beat Cody Garbrandt. That's what I said yesterday on the podcast. I'm still going to pick him, even though I'm a big Cody guy. I love Garbrandt when he's on, but I need to see Cody be, I need to see that new approach from him over and over again. I need to see multiple rounds. I need to see multiple fights. I liked a lot what I saw in the Sunsao fight his last time out, but he's coming off the injury. He's coming off of COVID. It was one fight. There's still no crowd, which I think is good for Cody. That I don't, last week at the Toyota Center in Houston, 16,000 fans, $75,000 on the line. Cody may have ditched some of the patience that he has been trying to preach and show in the Sun fight, and that he's been talking about since those losses. He may have ditched that. Apex Center, even if there is some people there, obviously there's not a lot of people. So Cody's not going to have that crowd to spur him on in this one. I think that's good for Garbrandt, but I am going to pick Rob Font. I think the length of Font and this one's going to be a little too much for Garbrandt. I think the later this fight goes on, I do think Cody might tag him here and there. It just depends on if he can put him away. We've seen him in the past hurt guys, but not able to put him away. Then he gets a little too confident. So we could see that in this fight. Later on in the fight, if Garbrandt does hurt him early, gets a little too confident, maybe he opens up, old Cody comes out, Rob Font catches him with that length. So that should be very interesting to see in the main event there. And I see now we're having people more guys jump on here and ask some questions. From Jeff Englehart, said agreed, Cody Font should be great, and I give the edge to Font as well. Still bummer we never got Cody versus Lineker. Those are the power guys without a doubt at 135. That is a massive bummer. And John Lineker now, of course, over in one championship doing his thing over there. But that would have been phenomenal to see Lineker versus Cody Garbrandt. And even, Cody moving down to 125. You talk about the power guys. Devison Figueiredo down at 125. That was going to be the matchup possibly. Garbrandt versus Figueiredo before Cody had to pull out with the injury, then had the COVID bout, and now stayed at 135 for at least now. But at that time, he was going to move down to 125, and that would have been a match. If he could have made 125, I'm still a little skeptical of that. But had he made it, that would have been a fantastic championship fight just because of the power Figueiredo possesses and the power that Garbrandt possesses. And to be honest with you, outside of Lineker, it's Garbrandt and it's Figueiredo, those smaller guys, 135, 125, that possess the most power in those divisions. So that would have been certainly, but yes, the Lineker fight, if that would have ever happened, that would have been a very fun one. And I agree with Jeff there again, as I was saying that I'm Jeff, but I agree with the other Jeff Englehart here, that I do think here that Cody Garbrandt, Rob Font the length will be a little too much for Cody, but should be a firefight. I think someone's going to get knocked out. As I said, Rob Font has been hurt before. We'll see what happens coming up tomorrow at UFC Vegas 27. All right, let's move on a little bit to Bellator 259 and then also a few plays for tonight. I talked about some of the betting angles on episode 88 yesterday of the podcast. And for UFC Vegas 27 with Luke Lampy, I didn't really talk about some of the betting angles for Bellator 259 tonight. If you want a full list of bets that I'm placing tonight, if you want a full list of picks for Bellator 259, you want to go check out my betting podcast. That's the Man in the Cage sports betting show. There's a link in my bio on Twitter and on Instagram at Jeff_Brantley. Check it out. There's 2-tier options. You can get a full list of picks, full list of tips weekly, daily, whenever there's fights. And I give some other stuff out for some of the other sports as well. So go check that out. But I will give a few in just a second here, as we're now about 12 minutes away from Bellator 259 kicking off. And you do want to follow me all night at Jeff_Brantley on Twitter, as I will be tweeting live with all these fights. And LFA, I'll be watching a little of that LFA card tonight in Invicta, but a lot of this Bellator card tonight, I'll be tweeting along live with it. I'm actually going to be jumping on the media sessions with all these fighters. So after every fight, I'm going to be asking certain fighters questions, certain ones that I feel need to be asked. So follow me there at Jeff_Brantley all night for all the coverage and any extra content, any extra things you're going to want to hear from these fighters after they participate in Bellator 259 tonight. But Cyborg, Leslie Smith, the main event of the evening for the featherweight title. Cyborg once again defending that title. And I talked about it on episode 88 in my prediction for Bellator 259 that, both women this week at the media day kind of, moving along the notion, kind of creating the appearance that, and I don't want to say creating the appearance. I do think they believe in this, but both women really not taking much away from that first fight. Leslie Smith saying, I've learned a lot. My business career now, I'm more patient. I don't, I used to hit, this was her exact words. She said, I used to go let someone hit me so I could hit them a time or two. I would get hit so that I could hit my opponent. I'm not like that now. So Leslie Smith says she's different. Chris Cyborg, she also mirrored those comments saying, she's not that Cyborg herself. She's a different fighter from 5 years ago. Everybody's a different fighter from 5 years ago. Both women not really playing into that first fight. That would kind of kill some of the hype in this matchup, certainly. But I also think they do believe that a little bit. They want to stay focused on this matchup. I don't think it's going to go that way, though. I think it's going to be very similar to the first time we saw this matchup, in which Chris Cyborg walked right through Leslie Smith. Buzzsaw right through her. took her head off the line perfectly, was throwing nice combinations, crisp combinations, was lighting up Leslie Smith, used some great movement, some great angles in that fight. I said it on the episode yesterday that you can listen to now, that was one of the best. It was only about a minute performance, certainly, but that was one of the best Cyborg performances we've ever seen. And she's had a lot of them, of course. I mean, she's only had a couple few times where you really say, that was a bad Cyborg performance, especially the Amanda Nunes fight, of course, when she lost by knockout. But mostly, but there's a ton of other fights out there. You can say Cyborg was brilliant in that fight. She was absolutely brilliant in that Leslie Smith fight. Very brilliant. Did a lot of great things. And I expect something similar tonight. Does she knock Leslie Smith out in a minute? Yes and no, right? I don't know if it's going to go that fast. You never know if it's going to go that quick. Maybe Leslie Smith does try to do a couple extra things to stay alive in this fight for longer. But I do think eventually, maybe 2 minutes into the first round, 3 minutes into the first round, heck, if it gets to the bell, early second round, I do think Cyborg is going to eventually catch Leslie Smith enough where she can put her away and win this fight by TKO tonight over Leslie Smith, and once again retain that belt. And I mean, obviously that's not a huge prediction. That's what everyone's predicting, but it's going to happen, and I think it's going to happen very easily for her. And we're just going to keep moving down the line here of Bellator putting opponents in front of course, Cyborg. The toughest opponent Cyborg has faced in Bellator so far was one of her first fights, or her first fight in Bellator against Julia Budd. And she still walked through Julia Budd fairly easily. There's been arguments made even her last fight against Arlene Blencowe that, Blencowe, she does this, she does that, she's going to give her issues. No, I mean, Cyborg went out there, she got her first career submission in that fight. She toyed with her essentially, went out there, knew she could find the submission, found it. We're just going to keep seeing that until either someday, somehow, if Amanda Nunes ends up in Bellator, if Cyborg ends back up with the UFC, or they do a cross-promotional thing, unless she ever faces Amanda Nunes again, or if Kayla Harrison comes from the PFL and signs with Bellator, which there's starting to be a lot of, it seems, heat, a lot of things going on there that both women are talking about each other now. You can tell they think they're going to fight each other at some point, and I tend to think that too. So Kayla Harrison, certainly, if the UFC doesn't pry her way to the UFC to face Amanda Nunes, we could see Chris Cyborg someday face Kayla Harrison inside the Bellator cage. I guess the UFC octagon if she ever went back, but most likely the Bellator cage. That's probably the only matchup down the line that would ever, unless Cyborg gets really old here, which she will eventually, threaten or really challenge Chris Cyborg. She's going to win easily tonight again. But there's some other fantastic matchups coming up. Of course, the prelims are going to start at 4:30. The main card later on tonight on Showtime, by the way. You can check out all the prelims live on YouTube. I don't know if they're still showing the main card on YouTube or not. You definitely go check it out, though, on Showtime. But, Austin Vanderford, Fabian Edwards, Leon Edwards' brother, Fabian there, Mr. Van Zandt, as he's been joking around all week with everybody, Austin Vanderford. That's going to be a fantastic fight. You also have Darion Caldwell, Leandro Higo. That's going to be a good one. Caldwell moving back down to bantamweight now. I'm excited to see the changes he's made since moving to Sanford MMA out in Florida. Michael Chandler, others there. It's really improved a lot of wrestlers all around. And that's what Darion Caldwell is going to look to do tonight. Look improved against Leandro Higo coming off of a loss. I'm excited to see that version of him. As I said, the Vanderford-Edwards fight going to be very good. I think Vanderford, once he gets Edwards to the ground, I do think it should be all him from there. Edwards, though, he is a big middleweight, though, and he's really hard to get down, and he's really hard to keep down, especially early in the fight. Vanderford's weakness a little bit is that striking, but I don't see it necessarily from Fabian Edwards in this fight. We'll see again. I've seen some crazy things, but I don't know if Edwards can deal with Vanderford, especially once Vanderford starts getting those takedowns, starts working his scrambling ability, his jiu-jitsu on the ground. So two great fights there. Jaleel Willis, Mendonca, that's going to be a good fight. Maybe some fireworks there. Valerie Loretta, she moves to the main card with Hannah Guy now, as we did lose a fight yesterday. Christian Edwards and Ben Parrish, that was removed from the main card. Ben Parrish wasn't clean. Christian Edwards, the other side of the matchup, was not cleared by the commission to fight, so they had to move a fight up. They moved Loretta Guy up. And that should be an interesting one, as well as I do think Loretta is going to eventually find the stoppage, but you never know. I mean, both of these women, Loretta's only 3-0 in her MMA career. Hannah Guy's 2-1. Loretta, I think the difference is I do think she's got the higher ceiling, and she does train at American Top Team. She's got a great gym behind her. She's training with fantastic fighters every single day. I do think that's why Loretta is going to end up winning here. But you never know. I mean, both women have 3 fights underneath their belt in their mixed martial arts careers. So Hannah Guy, maybe she's Hanzo Gracie. I don't know. I mean, maybe she's going to go out there and submit Valerie Loretta here. You just don't know. But I'm going to pick Valerie Loretta in that one. I do think that should be an interesting matchups. We'll see if Guy can do anything to challenge Loretta in this fight. And then, as I said, a lot of the prelims, very good. I'm not going to go through all of them here so I can get to my bets as we're about 5 minutes away from that card kicking off. And then I'm going to jump on over, watch that card, jump on some of those media sessions with these fighters. So I'm going to go just through one more fight here. But I am surprised, and I thought this fight should have been moved up, but the Brett Johns, Danny Sabatello fight, the Italian gangster, Sabatello, who was on Dana White's Contender Series, similar to Vanderford, who was on Dana White's Contender Series 2, wasn't signed. Same thing, Sabatello was on there, won, didn't get signed. Now he's in the Bellator, and he's facing a former UFC guy here as well, and Brett Johns. This is an interesting matchup for me. I think Johns' experience is going to get him the fight, but I would not be surprised if Sabatello found a way to make this an interesting fight. They maybe found a way to score that upset here against Brett Johns. So this one should be a very, very interesting matchup between Johns and Sabatello. And I believe that's actually the second fight of the night coming up on this Bellator 259 card, unless they moved it around a little bit. So looking forward to that one as well. Should be a very good one the whole night for Bellator 259. And again, keep it locked right here. The Man in the Cage podcast at Jeff_Brantley all night for coverage. All right. A few just betting tips real quick. And again, we got about 4 minutes. I'm going to jump off right as this card kicks off. I said I'd walk you up to it. So I wanted to go about 30 minutes here, but just a few betting tips real quick going into this Bellator 259 card. A couple of the bets I really like going into tonight, and they're actually in the main event. Even though this is going to be a blowout between Cyborg and Leslie Smith, if you look in the right spots, I do think that some of these props, one of these round prop plays, and even a Cyborg play aren't bad, actually. And I'll start out with the round plays real quick, but again, this is if you have to check around your sports book, but I found sports books that have fight doesn't complete 2 full rounds at -150. And I found fight, and this is a little chalkier, but if you want to be a little safer, fight doesn't complete 3 full rounds at -220. Those aren't bad, especially the -150, because I don't think this fight's going to last 2 rounds. I don't see how Leslie Smith survives that unless Cyborg wants to toy with her again and wants to go for submission. Otherwise, I think it's going to be all Cyborg, and I think she finishes her on the feet at some point early on in this fight, round 1, early round 2. So I like that bet a lot. Fight doesn't complete 2 full rounds, -150. And if you're going to get even trickier, fight doesn't complete 1 full round, it's +175, I believe. If you really want to get tricky there, if you really want to go into that and sweat it out maybe a little bit, because it is MMA still, who knows, go with that. But I like the fight doesn't complete 2 full rounds, -150. And then I do like a Cyborg play by knockout and some sports books. It's -240. Again, you're getting pretty chalky at that point, getting up near -250. But Cyborg -240 by knockout. To me, that's almost free money here. I don't think she's going to submit her because, again, Leslie Smith has never been submitted in her career. And I think Leslie Smith's a little bit better of a grappler than who Cyborg faced her last time out, Blenko. Leslie Smith's been on the biggest stages, so I don't think Cyborg's going to submit her. I think she's going to knock her out. I don't think it's by decision. So the -240 there, I think that's kind of free money tonight for Chris Cyborg or anyone that's going to bet Cyborg by knockout against Leslie Smith. So I like some of those. And just real quick, I know I'm wrapping it up here in just about a minute. Darion Caldwell, Vanderford, I don't think that's a bad parlay. Those are tough fights, though. It's always tricky parlaying those. But Caldwell, Vanderford, that would be an interesting parlay. Vanderford by sub +375. Again, I would go small if you were going to do that, but just some of the ones I've been looking at. And, Caldwell, fight doesn't go the distance, -120. I think that's really good too, because Caldwell's only weakness, the one he has had in his career, is he gets guillotined a lot. He has a lot of neck submissions that he's been caught in, including the last time out by AJ McKee and a neck crank. Because of that wrestling style, he leaves his head in there a little too long. Even more so than a lot of other wrestlers have and other fighters. So if he does lose, I think he might get caught with the guillotine. Otherwise, on the other end of that, I do think Caldwell might finish Higo tonight. He finished him in the first matchup when they faced each other. I think he might do it again. -120 for those two. Fight doesn't go the distance. I really like that a lot. So just a few betting tips there for Bellator 259. I'm going to jump out of here, guys. Thanks for joining me on this YouTube Live. I've had fun. Follow me on Twitter at Jeff_Brantley. Same thing on Instagram, guys, at Jeff_Brantley. Quick shout out to the sponsors out there of the show, DBK Media. They do a great job. They've been shooting all my videos, doing a lot of my content. So shout out, guys, if you want to go check out a great company to go check out right now, especially if you own a business and you're looking to do some things with websites, things of that nature, social media, all that stuff, go check out DBK Media. And then also Bovada, as always, you can go check out my link. It's up right now on my Twitter, my bio and Twitter at Jeff_Brantley. Go check it out. I have a Bovada link up there too. Go sign up for the Man in the Cage podcast using the link, and you can use that referral code to sign up for Bovada. So thanks for Bovada as well. All right, everybody, I'm going to get out of here. Time to go check out Bellator 259. Excited about this card coming up tonight. Some great fights. I'll be tweeting along with them live all night, and I'll also be in these media sessions asking some of these fighters questions. So keep it locked right here on the Man in the Cage MMA and Combat Sports podcast. Until then, everybody, I'll talk to you later.